Picture the world right before the flood. Humanity is violent, corrupt, and terrified. Strange giants walk the earth, warriors of renown that ordinary people whisper about in fear. The Bible calls them Nephilim, the offspring of something not entirely human. Then the waters of judgment fall, and the story seems over. The giants drown, the world resets, and God starts again with Noah. But what if that's not where their story ends? What if the bodies of the Nephilim died in the flood, but their spirits didn't? What if those restless hybrid spirits became the beings we now call demons, still hunting for bodies, still pushing humanity toward the same darkness that brought the flood in the first place? And what if, after the waters receded, those same spirits began a new project to rebuild the giant bloodlines through possession, corruption, and a deliberate targeting of the nations, like Canaan? In this video, we're going to explore one controversial theory, that the Nephilim were half human, half fallen angel, that the human side died in the flood, that the fallen angel's spirit side survived, and that these disembodied spirits are responsible for both the rise of post-flood giants and the demonic activity that still haunts our world today. To understand this theory, we have to go back to one of the most mysterious passages in Scripture, Genesis chapter 6. It describes a time when the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took them as wives. From these forbidden unions came the Nephilim, mighty men of old, men of renown, beings that were more than ordinary humans. There are multiple interpretations of who these sons of God were. Some say they were powerful human rulers or kings. Others argue they were the line of Seth intermarrying with the line of Cain. But the view that undergirds this theory is the oldest and most supernatural one, that the sons of God were rebellious heavenly beings, fallen angels who crossed a line God never designed them to cross. In that view, the Nephilim are literal hybrids, half human, half fallen angel. They inherit physical bodies from their human mothers, but their nature is warped by the spiritual corruption of their fathers. They become living symbols of rebellion, violence, and corruption, filling the earth with bloodshed and terror. According to this line of thinking, the flood is not just judgment on human wickedness. It is also a targeted strike against a corrupted gene pool, an attempt to wipe out this unnatural hybrid race. The flood narrative emphasizes that all flesh had corrupted its way on the earth. God declares that he will destroy all living things with the earth, and the waters cover the highest mountains. From a physical perspective, the Nephilim are wiped out. Their giant bodies, their physical strength, their visible presence, all of it drowns beneath the rising waters. But here is the critical question this theory asks. What happens to a being that has a human body and a fallen angel father when the body dies? Human beings, when they die, pass into the realm of the dead, awaiting judgment or resurrection. Angels, by nature, are spiritual beings who do not die in the way humans do. So what about the offspring of both, a hybrid that never should have existed in the first place? In some ancient Jewish writings outside the Bible, there is a disturbing answer. These texts suggest that when the bodies of the giants were destroyed, their spirits were left to wander the earth. They became restless, hostile, and driven by hatred toward both God and humanity. In other words, the destruction of their flesh did not erase their existence. It only stripped them of their physical form. According to this theory, the flood solved the visible problem of the Nephilim, but it unleashed a new invisible one, a race of disembodied hybrid spirits with no home, no body, and no rest. Now we come to the heart of the idea, the link between the Nephilim and demons. In the New Testament, demons are described as unclean spirits that crave a body. They beg not to be cast out. They seek to inhabit people. They even ask to enter animals rather than roam without a host. They are tormented by a kind of homelessness, a desperate desire to embody themselves again. If demons are simply fallen angels, that behavior is a bit strange. Angels, fallen or not, are spiritual beings who can appear, act, and influence without needing a human body. So why would they seem so desperate for physical embodiment? This is where the Nephilim spirit theory steps in. If demons are the spirits of dead Nephilim, it suddenly makes sense. They once had bodies, huge, powerful, imposing forms that dominated ancient humanity. They were used to commanding fear, wielding physical strength, and expressing their will through flesh. When those bodies were wiped out by the flood, Their spirits were left stranded in a world they could no longer touch. Now, as disembodied hybrids, they crave what they lost. They seek out human hosts, not just to torment them, but to experience embodiment again. Possession becomes a twisted attempt to reclaim what the flood took, a physical presence in the material world. In this view, demonization is not random. It is the ongoing frustration of Nephilim spirits trying to get back into the game. But the theory doesn't stop with demons. The Bible contains a chilling little phrase in Genesis 6, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward." That afterward is the crack in the door that has launched countless debates, because after the flood, we begin to see other giant-like figures and clans appear in the biblical narrative. We encounter groups like the Anakim, the Rephaim, and other tribes that are described as unusually large, terrifying, and warlike. The spies sent into Canaan report seeing giants and feeling like grasshoppers in their sight. Later, we meet Goliath, a champion whose height and armor mark him as anything but ordinary. The question is, where did these giants come from if the flood wiped everyone out except Noah's family? Some say these post-flood giants are just tall humans with exaggerated reputations. Others argue for a new incursion, that fallen angels repeated the sin of Genesis 6 in a second wave. But the theory you're exploring offers another layer, that the disembodied Nephilim spirits worked through human hosts, bloodlines, and cultures to recreate something like their former bodies. They no longer have their own flesh, so they pursue a long game, influence human reproduction, push certain lines toward corruption, and combine occult knowledge, violence, and spiritual rebellion to rebuild giant bloodlines in key territories. One of their primary laboratories becomes the land of Canaan. Now imagine the land of Canaan through this lens. It's not just a collection of tribes, it's a spiritual battleground. God promises this land to Abraham's descendants, but by the time Israel approaches, it's filled with nations steeped in idolatry, child sacrifice, ritual sex, and dark spiritual practices. This is exactly the kind of environment where disembodied Nephilim spirits would thrive. In this theory, these spirits begin to possess leaders, priests, and key bloodlines within Canaanite society. They whisper in dreams, appear in visions, and demand rituals that open doors to deeper and deeper spiritual control. The more the people participate, the more they yield their bodies and minds to these entities. The goal is not just influence, it is a slow, generational reshaping of the human vessel itself. Over time, you could imagine lines emerging that are stronger, larger, and more brutal than their neighbors. Stories of great men, monstrous warriors, and terrifying champions spread. The Canaanite gods, idols, and high places become the public face of a private spiritual occupation. Behind the carved stone and wooden images stand the same ancient spirits that once walked the earth in giant flesh. So when Israel is commanded to drive out these nations, the theory suggests it's more than a simple land dispute. It's the continuation of a war that started before the flood, a conflict between a holy God and a hybrid race determined to corrupt humanity and reclaim their physical presence on the earth. This is where the conquest of the land of Canaan takes on a darker and more unsettling tone. Many readers struggle with the severity of the commands to destroy certain peoples completely. From a purely human perspective, it feels harsh and difficult to reconcile with a loving God. But if you insert the Nephilim spirit theory into the background, a different picture appears. In that frame, God is not ordering genocide against ordinary, innocent populations. He is targeting regions and groups that have become saturated with a particular kind of spiritual and genetic corruption. These are communities where the old Nephilim spirits have embedded themselves deeply, steering culture, bloodline, and religion toward a replay of the pre-flood world. Allowing them to remain would mean allowing the same experiment that once demanded a global reset to continue unchecked. You can think of it as a spiritual quarantine, just as a surgeon cuts aggressively around a cancer to save the rest of the body. God moves decisively to contain and cut off a spreading contamination. In this theory, the wars of Israel are not merely territorial, they're surgical strikes in an ancient war against a hybrid race that refuses to stay buried. And when we finally arrive at stories like David and Goliath, it is not just a shepherd boy versus a tall warrior. It is the last swing of the sword against a bloodline that traces back to Genesis 6. So, where does this leave us now? According to this theory, those Nephilim spirits didn't simply vanish when the last giants fell. They are still present, still restless, still hunting for hosts in every generation. What changed is not their existence, but the battlefield. In the modern world, we don't build altars to bawl on hilltops, but the same spirits can work through other idols: power, lust, violence, control, and deception. They no longer need a 10-foot-tall warrior to terrorize a village when they can use a broken human life to wreak havoc in a family, a community, or even an entire culture. The language has shifted from giants and Canaanites to oppression, possession, addiction, and spiritual bondage, but the underlying pattern looks eerily familiar. Every time a person yields themselves to darkness, there is an open door. Every time a culture normalizes what God calls evil, the spiritual climate changes. In this view, the same entities that once stalked the earth in giant flesh are now content to operate from the shadows, wearing human faces, speaking with human voices, but driven by an ancient hatred for God and his image bearers. And yet, the theory does not end in fear, because the New Testament presents a clear picture, whatever these spirits are. However old their story, they are subject to a higher authority. Jesus casts them out with a word, strips them of their power, and ultimately promises a final judgment where they will no longer roam free. Before we close, it's important to say this clearly. This is a theory. It connects scattered biblical hints with ancient traditions and a lot of careful imagination. Some believers think demons are fallen angels themselves. Others reject any idea of post-flood Nephilim entirely and see all the giant language as exaggerated or symbolic. What this theory does is offer a way to tie several strange threads together. The mysterious sons of God in Genesis 6, the existence of pre- and post-flood giants, the odd behavior of demons in the New Testament, and the intense spiritual atmosphere around places like Canaan. Is it the only way to read the story? No. Is it guaranteed, ironclad doctrine? Also no. But it does something powerful. It reminds us that the biblical world is far more supernatural than many of us have been taught. It pulls back the curtain a little on a war that's been raging since before the flood, a war that touches history, nations, bloodlines, and individual lives. So let me put this question to you. If the Nephilim were half human and half fallen angel, if their bodies died in the flood but their spirits survived, if those spirits are what we now call demons, still craving bodies, still influencing nations, still trying to rebuild what they lost, what does that change about how you see the spiritual world around you? Does it make the idea of spiritual warfare feel more real, or does it sound too far-fetched? Do you see the conquest of the land of Canaan differently if you view it as a strategic war against corrupted bloodlines rather than a simple land grab? And when you hear stories of oppression, possession, and encounters with evil today, does this framework make them more terrifying, or does it help them make more sense? I want to hear your take. Do you think demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, or do you hold to a different view? Drop your thoughts, questions, and even your disagreements in the comments. As always, keep it respectful, keep it thoughtful, and remember, we're exploring mysteries that are bigger than any of us. If you found this deep dive helpful, share it with someone who loves biblical mysteries and weird corners of Scripture. And if you want more content like this on giants, angels, demons, and the unseen war woven through the Bible, make sure you're subscribed because this story is far from over.